Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Matthias Nordvig.
Hello, everybody. This time we are joined by Rich Blackett. Rich is an officer of the Pagan Federation and also through UK in the UK. Also on the board of also through UK and former chairman as well. And he's going to be talking to us about trolls. Welcome to the show.
Thank you once again. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back.
Yeah, I feel like you're becoming our resident Halloween special.
Oh, indeed.
I always look forward to this. Everybody, I love spooky things. I love all things spooky, horror, dark. I went to see the last podcast on the left live yesterday, which was a lot of fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah, anything horror, I'm there. So I always look forward to these ones. Matthias, you big into horror?
Do I look like somebody who would be into horror?
You can never really tell by someone's face, can you?
No, I guess not. I was thinking more of like the way that I dress, always in something black with something metal on it. And yes, of course I am. And actually right now I am searching high and low for some decent horror movies.
Yeah.
Right? There's so little coming out that's good. It's always like a friend.
I'm going to disagree with you there, Matthias. Straight away went to the conflict. There are lots of great horror movies out there. I think it's harder to find them because there's so many sources of streaming this and streaming that. That might be the thing too. A friend suggested a movie for me. It's called Gaia, and I sat down and watched 3 minutes of it, and I was like, I can't deal with this shitty acting.
Oh yeah.
But apparently the storyline is good, so I'll give it a try again. But that's the thing that always gets me is like the poor acting in a lot of these. So Rich, where do I go and find proper horror?
I think it's often by recommendation. There was a tremendous one was recommended to me not that long ago. Low budget, but really good. It seemed to be about sort of supernatural things, but it was all set on a council estate in Scotland, which seems an unlikely place to set it, about this child who's somehow maybe evil or has some kind of, and it's sort of implied, it's all very, very implied that the mother of the child had maybe some kind of non-human person or an elf or some kind of fairy folk or something like that, but not in a kind of upbeat, happy way. It's all very sort of grim. And there's a fantastic moment in it where a local council official finds out they've acquired a flat by lying, and she starts to challenge them. And the mother of this boy walks up to her, and when she finds out she's being challenged, she says something like, "Oh, I curse you to wander and wander. You will never find your way home. You will wander and wander until your feet run red with blood until you starve." And say, okay, and she looks at her very strangely. But throughout the rest of the movie, you see this council official still wandering around late at night on this housing estate, and it's so it's good. It's very, very urban, but really, really excellent. It's again low budget, but for what it did in its budget, it was fantastic.
What's it called?
I'll dig out the title for you. As we go on. That came out of left field.
That's the worst recommendation when you say this.
I'll find it. It's not that hard to find, but there's this fantastic moment in it where this guy is supposed to go and hunt the child, and he's given all these weird tattoos, and he's told that you can do this and this. You'll be invulnerable to this and this. And when they go to Scotland, they have to go and speak to some guy who's of some note there to say, we're going to be hunting this guy. We won't be speaking to the dead. We won't be doing this. And he says, okay, well, you're on my land now. You've got these, and it hints at a lot of stuff. It doesn't too explicit. I mean, there is some very gory moments in it, but that really took me by surprise. I really enjoyed that one.
I think low budget British horror tends to do really well. Or for me anyway, I really enjoy it because I think low budget horror in general goes well because you have to think out of the box and use a lot more suspense, which I prefer. I think jump scares are cheap. I'm not a big fan of them. I think it's an easy way to scare. It doesn't really interest me. But a film that makes me feel uncomfortable and creeped out and kind of just a little bit icky by the time it's done, that's the one that I like. It doesn't need the big jumps and scares and almost monsters, because I guess I'm not a huge believer in supernatural. I'm not a believer in monsters, so they don't really scare me too much. I'm more scared of humans when it's humans doing horrible things. That's kind of my fear when it comes to horror. That's the ones that I enjoy when it could be real.
I like the psychological and the supernatural, and especially when the two things sort of like conflate and you're not really sure if it's something psychological or supernatural. Yeah, I just binge watched the new Dharma show.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay,
yeah. That was interesting to watch. I would say that it's definitely different from the typical true crime porn out there, in the sense that you get a lot more insight into victims and a lot of things that goes on around Dharma as a person. And then, of course, I just really enjoyed him getting the shit kicked out of him at the end, the metal bar.
Hey,
I found that film actually, by the way. I found the film. The film's called. The film I was talking about before was called Outcast.
Outcast. Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's from 2010.
Okay.
I think it's on Shudder if you're in the UK. And probably
Shudder's
streaming.
quite good.
So it's on there. And again, it was low budget, but just the fact it was set on a council estate and very sort of grimy and urban and kind of, really interesting. Yeah. It's got the only big name who's in it is, I've forgotten who's in it, is James Nesbitt. You've probably seen him, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Most famously in The Hobbit, but he's been in lots and lots of other things as well. But Outcast
He was I feel like he was Sky Atlantic's poster boy for a while. Like he was in like a bunch of like Sky TV series for a little bit.
He doesn't play a very sympathetic character at all in this. No. He's quite an unpleasant character. So he's really good though. So I definitely recommend it. That's my horror movie recommendation.
There we go.
Good place to start.
We're all gonna watch it, and I'll let you know what I think.
But not much related to Nordic mythology, sadly.
No. I guess there isn't much. I guess the only one I can think of is The Ritual.
The Ritual.
They go down the King's Trail in Sweden, and then there's the runes hanging from the tree. I guess that's about it from what I can think.
I think in the book there's a lot more to do with the mythology and also links to black metal and other kinds of interesting stuff like that. There's an awful lot more of that in the book, which obviously for time constraints and scripting you can't include all of that. But there's a lot more of that the bad guys in it are in a black metal band or black metal fans or this, which is a fantastic source of fun stuff to sort of put in a movie, I think.
I mean, I just appreciate that in that movie, Scandinavia sort of like becomes the hillbilly outback to the UK that the Appalachia is for the US. Like that's where you go and get killed by weird people,
Well, that's actually quite an old trope. I think if you look at some of the early 20th century weird fiction, the number of stories where somebody goes to Scandinavia and that's the strange place where something strange weird stuff happens, or they bring an artifact back from Scandinavia and oh my goodness, you shouldn't have brought the thing back. M.R. James put that in a lot of his tropes, a lot of his stories.
Really, in many ways, it goes all the way back to Shakespeare.
Yes.
And like using Scandinavia as some kind of like fascinating distant place where you can have King Hamlet fucking around at Elsinore. And then, later on you have Mary Wollstonecraft's letters from Scandinavia. She's like on a journey to track down a boat that has been stolen from some harbor in the the UK, sorry. And then she's like documenting the Scandinavians and like in her perspective, we're all a bunch of hillbillies and savages in different ways, which I mean I prefer. So I'm good with it.
Well, I think another one, which is Edgar Allan Poe's The Maelstrom, which is like natural horror. There's not sort of any supernatural things, but of course the huge maelstrom it describes is completely fictional. It barely exists at all, but the story's fantastic. It's a because it's I remember reading that as a child, and this is his incredibly vivid story. I'd never heard of Edgar Allan Poe at the time, but it's just the intensity of that is it's fantastic.
Nice. I'm trying to think if I can think of any other horror movies that have got like runes or links to, because it does seem like there is at some point there is a link between like Satanism and like using runes and staves and that kind of thing. There is definitely some sort of connection there. I don't know if either of you know where that stems from or when that started, but they do kind of connect. So you do tend to maybe see them in, I guess, in movies, maybe when they're trying to make something look satanic, and you might find like the odd rune written next to it on the wall, I guess. But other than that, I can't think of many examples.
I think you could probably trace it back to sort of continental magic or people's vague knowledge of that, where anything that isn't in English must be magical. If it's, there's times where people were Jewish scholars and people saw them writing, in Hebrew and went, "Ooh, that's magical stuff." And it was probably just, a piece of, from the Torah, nothing very magical. Although, depends upon your point of view. Some people think the Torah is very magical, so there is that.
I mean, we have, Europe has a long tradition of actually writing down and codifying different alphabets. Like go back to Rabanus Maurus's the Inventione in the 800s. It is, right. He's like basically writing down all the letter systems that he's familiar with, and that becomes a manuscript tradition that is reproduced across Europe. And he's including runes, he's including a bunch of different manuscripts, also some of it not manuscripts, letters, and some of it is probably also just like stuff he invents. And
of course
and so when it comes to like the symbols, the sigils that we know from, nowadays they're associated with Iceland, right? So the Vegvísi is the most well-known one. And these types of sigils, they come from France, from the late medieval period. I think it's actually, maybe it's in the 1500s that it's earlier than that. They start producing manuscripts with such like magical symbols in them, and they attribute them to Solomonic magic. They say that this is the magic of the ancient King Solomon. So there you have that connection with the Jews and the
grimoire magic and all that sort of, yeah,
exactly. And then that spills over to the Galdrabækir in Iceland later on. And now that's like associated with runes and rune magic and Vikings and that kind of stuff, even though it came from France.
Yeah, it all kind of feeds back into itself. It's a curious thing.
Yeah.
At what point do you think it becomes tied in with Satanism then? Or that kind of...
I think it's because there is that disconnect of people not knowing, if it isn't Christian, then it must be evil. There's that very simple, simplistic understanding. Anything that's like writing down, oh, my cattle are ill, I will do this thing and that will make the cattle better. But so if you're not calling on God, oh, well, you must be calling on Satan. There's no middle ground there. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
I
was wondering if it was a bit, I was wondering if it was a bit newer than that, with maybe black metal being Scandinavian.
Oh, there's definitely that as well, yeah.
And then having the link to it there, and then those two being used together. And like Mel obviously has its links with Satanism, satanic cults.
I mean, the roots are pretty deep, right? They go back to the 1480s with the witch's hammer, right? Which is written at that time and then dispersed throughout Europe into the universities, and that's how the clergy starts basically coming up with a myth about Satan and myth about Satanism, right? So that's everything we know from popular culture today. That the horned goat dude, naked witches dancing around a fire, eating babies, all those kinds of things. Right? That all comes together in the fantasies in the aftermath of the publication of The Witch's Hammer, and that creates a very distinct sort of like Western European style of witchcraft, the style of the myth of the pact with the devil and all that stuff, and that's what then generates the witch hunts in the 15, 16, 1700s. And then, in the 19th century, you have a bunch of like kooky English aristocrats that are, fucking around with mysticism.
Absolutely.
And that's how you got Aleister Crowley. And then for the 20th century, and now you have the full package, right, of all of this stuff. And that's what, black metal artists, for instance, they pick up on, all the heavy metal artists in the mid to late 80s, right? And so that they sort of, they take the visuals, right?
Like the aesthetic, really, essentially.
Yeah. The ideas that are associated with all of this, they turn them into visual aesthetics on the album covers and so on. This is also why you have the Satanic Panic, right? In the 80s, even it starts in the 70s in different ways, right? One of the interesting things is that, going back to these like serial killers, is that several of them, use imagery or ideas that come from that as well. And that's of course because psychologically they're classifying themselves as evil, so they're associating with the most sort of like superficial aspects of ideas of evil in the culture. And that's why Jeffrey Dahmer had like the Satan's Bible and things like that.
Oh yeah. I think it's interesting that
not really.
Well, no, it's not really particularly, but obviously, but it seemed that way to people at the time, and all the the trappings of that is something that you find again and again. I was just, when you're talking about the Witch's Hammer from the 14th century, there's an older book, I think it's called Europe's Inner Demons, and it documents how every group that once they get in charge, they accuse the people who they've kind of taken over from of doing what we would call satanic stuff. So when the Romans are dominating Europe, the Christians are accused, well, we know what they get up to. They drink the blood of their God. Well, that's just, they're clearly degenerates. And then the Christians get in charge. And of course, well, these pagans, I've heard they do all kinds of things. So they're clearly degenerates. And everybody is accusing the other people of, it's that continuous, let's find a way to other them and say that they're awful. And that just never goes away.
This general human douchebaggery. It's very
basically yes. Unfortunately, yes. I don't know whether we talked. I mean, this is feeding into sort of what I wanted to talk about tonight. Is I think we mentioned the last time. I think it's the origin of the word magic, which is, I think, is a loan word from Persian into Greek, and it was always talking about what other people did. We do normal stuff. Those people over there do magic. We slaughter goats like normal people and offer them to our gods. Those people over there, goodness knows what they do, but they do weird stuff. We do normal stuff. And so it was magikoi, I think was the word, was the sort of word that, so it was always a word. Magic was always for what other people did. Christians don't do magic. Those people over there do whatever they're doing. So it was just a way to say anything that wasn't what we're doing is what.
Jesus did miracles, not magic.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the only exception, I mean, we're way off track here, but the only exception to that is powwow. Now, powwow, there's two things both called the same. There's powwow, which is some kind of Native American practice, but there's another Christian practice that is distantly related to sort of practices in Europe and folklore. But they just, all the practitioners of that described themselves, certainly in the 19th century, as I'm a Christian and I do this. But if you had your cattle were ill or something was wrong, you would get a guy who would take the evil eye off them. But he wasn't doing magic. Absolutely not. I mean, he kind of was. But as far as everybody was concerned, and that's to do with the Pennsylvania sort of Deitch and those sorts of people. And there's still people around who practice a variant of that. That's a sort of heathen thing, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So actually, I just Googled the etymology of magic, and the original Persian magush actually means a member of the learned and priestly class, right?
Yes.
So the Greeks, when they're adopting this term, right, they have techne magikos, which means essentially the techniques or technos of the magics. That then, or the art, essentially, right? That then becomes the idea of sorcery.
Sorcery or weird stuff that other people do. It's like we get the magi and that kind of stuff. And
yes,
it's whatever those weird priest dudes who come from Persia do from their perspective.
They sit in towers with like pointy hats with stars and sun and moon.
Well, we've all done that, Matthias. We've all done that.
But these are doing it in the wrong way.
Absolutely, yes. You're funny you should say that. I saw an advert on Facebook, and I don't know why this was a targeted ad to me. And it was an advert. I was, most of the targeted ads are scroll past, and it was this long silver robe. I thought, what's this? I was looking at it, and there's all these like really cool sort of looking clothes. I was like, maybe. And then I realized it was actually nothing esoteric at all. It was what were called modesty wear for Muslims going on a pilgrimage, like a Hajj or something like that. So it was nothing dodgy at all. And I thought, well, I can't order that. That's going to be so disrespectful to turn up in a big sort of silver, Muslim robe. But, my finger was hovering over the buy button. I will say that. So,
should we get on to trolls?
Absolutely,
yes,
absolutely.
Let's
talk about trolls because do we have many? I'm trying to think if I know of any stories in like British folklore that I know about.
Well, you probably know one that you probably heard at school.
Which one's this?
The Billy Goat's Gruff.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely.
Although technically comes from Norway, but
yeah, well, that's the thing. Trolls do seem to haunt Norway, I guess. That seems to be their stomping
we have plenty
ground.
of trolls in Sweden and Denmark too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I would personally, I kind of associate trolls with Norway. Obviously, I know that they are in the other Scandinavian countries, but it seems maybe wrongly. I always just kind of assume they seem to center there more.
No, that's just the ones that have reached the tourist industry better than the other ones.
Oh, okay. They've got a better marketing.
Absolutely, yes. I think
they've hired the right team.
Well, it's true. Well, if anybody, talking of the Billy Goat's Gruff, if anybody wants to have an absolute sort of memory hole, if they can look up the Ladybird book of the Three Billy Goats Gruff. And if you're of a certain age, everybody will have seen that book in the school library, would come across it, the classic illustrations, which are.
So I think I know this story. Can you just give me just a brief rundown of the plot?
The Three Billy Goats Gruff is where there's some goats living on one side of a river, and the grass is green. The grass is greener on the other side. It's a meadow. I forget what the Norwegian. There's a Norwegian word for like a meadow on the other side, and they want to cross the bridge, and the troll underneath won't let them. He lives under the bridge. And of course, eventually
he won't let them.
Yeah,
in the version that I was told as a child, he eats them.
There's in the folklore index. I think is it 121 or something like that. There's multiple variations. One of them he eats them all. In obviously the one I read as a child, they outwit the troll and everything's no goats get eaten. But of course, in older versions, lots of people get eaten and die. Of course, in all the cool old versions.
That's generally the thing.
Oh, yes.
I imagine, I can't imagine the troll is just like, no, sorry, not today. You can't come across. I feel like he wants those goats. He's like, get in my belly.
Well, exactly. I mean, much like in the original version of Sleeping Beauty, he didn't give her a kiss to wake her up.
No, of course not.
Okay. Yeah. So, that prince has a Me Too issue going on there. That's all I'm going to say.
I was just going to say.
Yeah. Oh, well, a lot of the older stories. Well, again, this is the thing about the older stories tend to have much less satisfying endings, and they're very sort of uncomfortable and weird. But that's what people liked at the time. And you've only got
I always wondered. This is off topic completely. How did Disney get away with stealing everybody else's stories and then just making millions and millions?
Because they were out of copyright.
Yeah.
Dan.
Is that literally how it works? Because although I guess in modern days, Disney now start to write their own stories based on a plan that they've got of other things. But they're all the original stories, like you said, Snow White, Cinderella, Little Mermaid, Sleeping Beauty. They're all
Frozen. Frozen is like the weirdest, fucked up version of Hans Christian Andersen's story about the Snow Queen. Like, what is that? What the hell is that? I'm going to have words with them.
Well, I mean, famously, they didn't even think that Frozen was going to be a hit. It took them by surprise. That's why it was this weird sleeper hit. They thought it'll do okay, but for some reason it struck a chord, and it was even Disney, they thought it would do all right, and obviously they hope it's going to be a success. But the colossal global hit that really took them by surprise.
Just needs a catchy theme tune. That's all you need.
That does help, and
of course it does.
I mean, Trolls, as far as I know, don't have a catchy theme song, but I mean, apart from the
Norwegians ones might, if they get the marketing team.
Well, they possibly do.
Well, they did. No, they did have the little plastic trolls with the multicolored hair. They were out. When were they popular in like the 90s?
Oh yes. Well, they're still around now. But actually, I've just thought that there is an album got by a local band doing this sort of long, slow music called Trollman av Ildtopperg, I think is the name, which is an attempted translation of Warlock of Firetop Mountain. And they had this. The only reason I remember them, a friend of mine sort of knew them slightly. You can buy them on stuff on Bandcamp. But there's an album which has something called like "The Skies Darken on the Eve of the Thousandth Bloody Sacrifice" or something. It's great. And I thought, well, it's a title like that, I've got to at least have a listen to once. And there's a couple of good tracks on there if you like that very slow sort of music. But yeah, it's an interesting local band who I know about. So there you go. Maybe that could be their theme song.
Yeah. Okay. So what is a troll? Is there like one typical, this is what a troll looks like?
You're not going to like this answer. No one knows. No one knows even what the word troll means or where it might have come from. There's a lot of debate about it, but unlike Draugr, which we talked about last time, troll is a mysterious word. There isn't really, even if you delve into all the obscure Indo-European, Proto-Germanic, there's a few people who've had a go, but there's nothing where you can just point that's what the origin is. Okay. Which is why it's this sort of very plastic word, and because it seems to get applied, as we'll see as we go on, to lots of different things, and how it was meant in the earliest times to how it ended up in sort of pop culture, meaning just a generic term for a goblin pixie type creature. Not quite an elf, but something else, that kind of stuff, or the concept of the little troll. But there's so many different variations of how the word's even used in the sagas, which is really interesting. And that I think we spoke about with, Draugr and like last time, that vampires and werewolves and stuff, the further back you go, it gets a lot more muddy as to those terms tend to be almost interchangeable, which to our modern day trope concept, well, no, we know what all these different things. No, there was no hard and fast rules. People in the 9th century couldn't just look it up on TV tropes and to check that they were ticking the right boxes.
Can I just say something about that? Like, in the understanding of like folklore and mythology nowadays, one of the biggest problems that we suffer from is sort of like this like index approach that people have to it. Like, there's a category and that has to like fit a certain idea. The worst example is, of course, the tendency in English to always translate Jötun to giant, right? Like this is they're not giants. Like, if anything, they're sort of they're like, I mean, etymologically, it looks like they're cannibals or, human eaters or something like that. So it's like they're scary ass demons, right? And we just think of them as some weird troll-like giants instead. So yeah, that was my soapbox moment.
But that's so odd because you say troll-like giant, but to me, trolls are small. Like
That's because you're English, man.
I know that's the thing though. For me, they're like tiny little things, maybe like 4 foot.
They become that way.
Yeah, but that's also like just to attach a comment to that. In Denmark, they're also small. Like trolls are smaller beings, and then you go to Norway, and then they're bigger beings.
It's interesting that they in this fantastic kids book we were talking about just before we started recording, Trolls and Their Relatives. There's this fantastic bit at the beginning where the book is all this gorgeous watercolors, and it's all in black, and it's before the humans, before the animals, before anything. There were trolls. Mm-hmm. These eyes just in this complete blackness, and this concept, at least in the broadest mythological folkloric sense, that they were some kind of primordial thing that isn't human.
Okay.
Except that's not the entire story, because you can become a troll as a human. You can get entrolled, which is a sort of an interesting sort of concept, that you can become a troll. You don't necessarily, so that doesn't make sense from our sort of point of view of the categorization of things fitting into nice little boxes. Trolls sometimes in some of these cases is a sort of synonym for magic. And in the much later period, you get trolldom, which is just like, oh, that's just sorcery.
Troll.
But it doesn't. But it's got very little to do with being a troll. It's just like a general term for magical practices or non-Christian shenanigans type thing. Or you get there's I think there's a trollkona, which is like a troll woman. So there's clearly male and female trolls. I think that's where Bragi the Old meets.
That also conflates with like notions of witches.
Yes, indeed. That's what I was going to come on to. Yeah. That sometimes the trolls seem to be a bit like Draugr, and then other times they're a bit like sort of witches or wizards. The classic sort of wizard, living up in a cave somewhere. Who, if you go up there, you can ask him for something, but he might kill you, he might eat you, or he might give you something. You never know. But they generally tend to live in remote places. So it's that concept of the fear of the wilderness. You want to go outside the village or the safe place, then you might encounter trolls out in the wilderness and that sort of thing. That's very much in a very, very broad sense. But I think the classic thing, of course, is in the Prose Edda, where Bragi meets the troll Kona, and he has a sort of conversation with, what is a troll? And the troll woman gives him various responses. What is a troll but that? So there's that sort of, there's various metaphors sort of as to what a troll could be. But are those just, as we know with the Prose Edda, is that just included? It's just, here's a collection of useful phrases if you're writing a poem, as opposed to any kind of set holy text or anything like that.
Yeah. We also have, in the Scandinavian landscape, several stories about different types of like natural features that have been created by trolls. So in Denmark, we have the ridges that go through the landscape thanks to the ice that has been pushing debris up in like these ridge formations, and they are usually said to have been made by trolls. The story is usually that a troll filled his glove with sand because he was tired of hearing the bells ringing in this particular church, and then he started walking towards it, but there was a hole in the glove, and then he just like deposit this long line of sand through the landscape instead. There are actually similar stories in Japan. And in Norway, what you get are usually like sort of, what do you call that? Like areas with a lot of like loose rock that have been deposited also by ice movements, of course, that have been said to be created by trolls. One of them actually is a story in Telemark where you have a troll who is actually Thor, who created that particular ridge. So yeah, they also have like those functions, right? And we have to ask ourselves: is that originally a troll, or was this a more of some other kind of like mythological being, maybe even a god or something like that?
Well, when you describe that sort of concept of trolls playing tricks on people or doing things to them, there's the concept in the sort of English Anglo-Saxon thing about elf shot. That if you've got a pain or something, you don't know where it came from, or maybe an elf shot you with an invisible arrow. That's what your problem is. And that sort of concept of them doing things, and it's not in a kind of funny way. It's considered sort of quite serious. That if you've been afflicted by, if you've got a pain or some kind of issue, and I think there's in one of the, is it in one of the sort of the book of the 9 herbs or something like that, the cure for elf shot or something like that. There's a particular reference there. But of course, animals can also be trolls. I think it's in Troll Saga Kraka, where there's a wild boar that attacks some people, and it's referred to as a troll because it's been overcome by magic. It's been trolled somehow. So it has a troll turned into a hog, or
isn't that the story about the bull that like bellows so loudly that it scares off an army? Is that the one you're thinking about?
I'm trying to remember now.
We also have another story. I can't remember which saga this is, but I
think it's the king and his retinue are attacked.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's that magical bull or troll bull. Yeah. But there are also some. There's another saga that has a couple of warriors or warlocks or whatever you want to call them, fighting each other in the guise of a bull and a bear, I think it is. And I guess that would also categorize as troll.
Shape changing is shape changing is always associated with magical practices, whether it's somebody's forced you into a particular shape or whether you've taken on the shape. And sometimes it's a psychological thing that I'm in the zone now. I'm going to go and do the thing. And in some of the stories, it's implied, no, the person literally is changing into that shape. And it gets, depending upon the sources and the era, as to how literal that means.
So could it be that a troll is, rather than a physical thing, is more the wording for an action? So something's behaving in a certain way. So he's being, like saying, trolled. I guess kind of in the way that a troll is today. Somebody who's trolling online, they're just being a fucking asshole. Like, they're not becoming an actual troll. They're just a dickhead. So could it be that same thing? It's like that's the. I mean, you're describing them as a troll.
If you look at what is usually attached to the idea of troll, it is that it's something disruptive.
Yes,
and something that disrupts our daily life and so on. So in that sense, I think trolling online that is applicable.
It seems as though maybe there isn't like a set physiological
no, there isn't
what a troll would be, because like, again, for me, they would be short, stocky, a little bit rough looking, I guess, thick. That was one that I always had, like a little bit stupid, not the size.
There's certainly folklore. The later folklore stories certainly are much more about them being stupid and of being, easily tricked by some clever young boy. And there's the story of the guy's eating a big meal and he's challenging the troll as to how much he can eat and drink. And he's got like a sheep's sort of like stomach or some kind of bag,
right?
Like a water sack. And he says, when I get hungry, when I get thirsty, if my belly gets too full, I just slit it open, let all the beer out, and I can drink some more. And the troll thinks, oh, well, I could do that. And of course, he does that, and he, that sort of thing. Or he tries to eat rock. He pretends he's eating rocks because he makes some cakes look like rocks, and that's a familiar to outwit the big supernatural stupid creature.
Am I a troll? If you told me that on a Friday night after a few beers, I'd be like, all right.
But then again, short, stocky.
It's not always. It's weird because it's not always a negative word, which again seems counterintuitive. We always associate now these days, certainly, with it's all bad things. There's it's in Bigya saga. I think there's a woman who's referred to as Trollit, as a sort of sorceress. But she's not bad. She's there, and she's just a normal woman.
She has Katla.
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
There's I think there's two characters in there who are referred to in that sort of way, with somehow with trollit is the word that's associated. So trollish maybe might be a sort of, but it doesn't. For one person, it's bad. For the other person, it's she's got it, but she's on our side, so it's not a problem. Yeah. So it gets really, really murky as to what all these different sort of descriptions and what people meant at the time. I think in the Völuspá there's a great line, something about let me think. It's something about the wolf that devours the sun or chews on the sun in the shape of a troll, the guise of a troll. Which obviously, what do you mean by guise of a troll? But obviously, everybody at the time would have go, "Oh well, we know what that means." But nowadays, you go, "Well, does that mean it was just evil, or is it just do trolls chew a lot?" But that the euphemism, the description, the kenning, I guess you can say, has been a lot. The meaning behind it's been lost to us.
Yeah, I mean, you also have those Christmas time stories where your farm, if you fail to do the right thing or something like that, then you get invaded by trolls, and then they'll come and have a party at your house. Yes. Of course, the variation of those stories where somebody brought a polar bear inside, and like, what kind of cat is that? And then they find out it's not a cat.
It's a very, very hungry cat. That's it.
Yeah, it's a very hungry cat. That's actually the polar bear story. That one is we have it in Iceland, we have it in Norway and Sweden and Denmark. So there's a pretty standard story, presumably.
Oh, I think there's there's a little connection here with the Draugr we talked about last time. I think it is also in a bigger saga. There's Thorolfur Twistfoot. He's described as sort of trollsligski or something. It's a word like that. Trollsligsti, I think, is the word. As sort of like trollish, again, that kind of word, as well as being sort of bloated and kind of strange and horrible. He's also trollish as well as being an undead. So again, you're getting that. So it's not quite a Draugr thing, but it's a word you might use to describe something weird or something unnatural in that sort of. Perhaps it's one of it is a very malleable word that in the different ways it can be referred to. And there's another line in Vatnsdæla saga where somebody points trollishly. Which is, how do you point trollishly? Do you like that, or I don't know? But people at the time would have gone, "Oh well, we know what that means." That's sort of that makes sense to those people. Yeah, and there's various other sort of concepts of what the troll seems to be a very useful word in lots of different, anything supernatural. Generally, the word troll ends up in there somehow.
Yeah.
So what the fuck is a troll?
Oh no, Daniel. So that's the end of the podcast. No, it's not.
I'm so much more confused now because
I think it's more interesting.
I think
complicated. I think it's complicated. The more you look into this old stuff, the more interesting it gets, because it becomes as much more interesting, weirder, in the best way. Once you start losing all your preconceptions, what you think trolls as big as a giant, or maybe huge thing, maybe it lives under a bridge. Now we know, but it seems that it can be a person, it can be a creature, it can be a completely non-human entity, and it can be. I think there is a story about there are gigantic trolls. There's the mountain dweller saga, where there's this literally as big as a mountain, where its eyes are said to be as big as the moon. This colossal beastie that somebody has to fight. That's someone lying, isn't it? That's someone lying. That's what I'd say. It's like, I had to fight this troll. His eyes were as big as the moon, and he was as big as a mountain. Of course, even if he was tiny, I'm telling everybody that he was the size of a fucking mountain.
But so that story is about volcanic eruptions. So,
yes. Are the trolls linked to sort of unnatural forces, or volcanism isn't seen as something good, so they're linked to that kind of. That's probably a troll under the earth. Because obviously the gods don't live down there; they live, in Asgard or higher up places, whereas underground is always seen as, place of either conspiracy or shenanigans or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
I really thought we were going to get like, this is what a troll is, or at least like some sort.
Why?
I don't know why.
Never simple. How many issues of the podcast have we done?
Exactly. It's like, have you ever gotten that answer?
It's never simple. I mean, if I ever come back to talk about werewolves, it gets confusing again. So we're away with that stuff.
That's next year sorted.
Next year,
I just thought it was going to be something, but this just feels like it's everything and nothing all at the same time.
Well, they are. It is a trolldom or trolling. It can be a sorcerer. It can be this supernatural creature, because people do meet these supernatural creatures who are clearly non-human at all, or some kind of witch type thing. Certainly far removed from baseline humanity, you might want to say. Mm-hmm. So these creatures that sort of interact, and you can get magic from, or have magical items. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so is there always magic involved?
Yes.
Okay.
Because anything that is, should we say, not so supernatural, something of the supernatural is always associated with trolls. Not necessarily
kind of otherworldly that you can explain.
Dangerous stuff generally is sort of because whenever you interact with magic, somebody dies. There's always a death or some kind of curse or something terrible happens to them.
Okay, that's top of the list of description of a troll. Now is something magical is always afoot.
But then you get the crossover with the Draugr. There's I think it's in is it Hrapr? I think is the guy who sort of refuses to die because he doesn't want to give his land up. He literally wants to take it with him. He refuses to sort of to pass away. And a lot of the descriptions of him are very similar to being a troll, and they absolutely, they try always to kill him, and they stab him, and he seems to be literally invulnerable until they chop his head off, burn him, and throw his ashes into the sea to be absolutely certain.
But again, that seems to be this idea of it's something annoying, or just kind of almost like the modern description again, something that's just a pain. Because again, they want to kill him, he won't die. It's that kind of thing of just being whether it's, this is as serious as killing a man, and it's not something finicky and small, but it's still kind of that kind of just a pain in the ass. You can't get the job done because he just won't die. And is that a recurring theme across?
Not so much in most of the troll stories, I would say. They tend to be outwitted, particularly in the later folklore stories. They tend to be a challenge or an obstacle along the way. Now, you could say, if you were taking a completely non-mystical interpretation, is a troll just a way of saying a bad person they met along the way who they had to outwit and to achieve the objective, if you want, but or have they actually met something sinister and sort of supernatural that is trying to eat them, because they're always trying to eat people.
Okay. So they're hungry.
When you're getting back to the cannibal concept, with the Jotuns or Ettins, if you want to do the other translation there.
And then and there's also they conflate with beings that would, in previous mythology prior to Christianity would have been considered positive, right? So in later folklore, you have, I think there's a Swedish story about Onspeg, so that means Odin's mountain, right? And that story is again about the young lad, usually number 3 out of
the youngest son,
sons, yes. Who goes and then outwits the troll that lives in the mountain, and that's obviously a story that has been told or refashioned in later times to undermine whatever folktale that was associated with Odin's mountain. Right? You have a similar story in Denmark from Tiser, which means the lake of Tyr, so the god, right? And the creation of that lake goes that they had built a church over in this little village that's right by the lake. And then the bells kept ringing, and this troll that lived in the area then got annoyed and left Zealand, where the lake is, for Fyn instead, so the other island over on the other side. And over there, the troll ran into a guy who was from that village, and the troll then asked him if he could bring a letter back to the priest, and he was like, "Yeah, sure, I can do that." And then
how polite of the troll.
Yeah, right. And then he goes there to the other side of the water again, and comes over to the Zealand, and he's like walking towards the village, and then he gets tired and he sits down in a meadow, and then he's like looks at that letter, and he's like, "Oh, this is a curious letter." And then as he's like looking at it, all of a sudden water starts like coming out and then pouring out, and then all of a sudden there's a lake right there, and that's Lake Teaser. Again, this is a commentary that has to do with like the legacy of paganism. This was a huge, site in the Viking Age for sacrifices and those kinds of things. You've actually found the largest gold ring that has ever been found in Scandinavia in that lake.
Okay, so I got two things to ask about that. One, I guess that's a link to magic, having a weeping letter. And two, do you think there's any link between it being called Tears Lake and the story of its origin through trolls? Yeah, I know we don't know much about Tyr, but is there any link?
The link is that we're dealing with a Christian tradition that is now trying to undermine a pre-Christian tradition, right? Because this site, the lake itself, would have had, like in the early medieval period, and probably far into the high medieval period, would have had they would have had like the knowledge that this used to be a significant site back in the pre-Christian period, right? So you purposefully try to undermine that memory of the pagan religion that used to exist there through these types of stories. And you find them again with Onsberg as well, an explanation for whatever holy attributes pre-Christian populations had to that mountain. You explain that through trolls that are then overcome by a quick-witted little dude, right? Those kinds of things. So that's pretty common.
Okay.
Well, I was going to also mention that I just saw somebody in the chat mention the word ogre, which often is people think is synonymous with troll. If I remember rightly, the origin of the word ogre is a French or an old medieval French word or something or whatever. I think it is a
ogre.
I can't remember what I think. I'm reaching back to when I did this for A-level a long, long time ago, and I think it was a corruption sort of it was a real historical thing that happened, but it got corrupted. It's essentially it was a way of describing. I believe wouldn't it have been the Huns who got as far as France? There was one particular sort of horde. It wouldn't have been the Mongols, but it was like a later horde that got as far as France. And the concept of the 10 league boots was because they were horseback riders and could come in, do terrible stuff and leave. So they must have massive boots to come in so quickly and attack. And it was sort of some kind of corrupted, garbled version of that ends up becoming a folk story about the strange sort of ugly guy who'll appear out of nowhere and do terrible things and then run away again. So you've got a bit of racism there as well. So.
I think you're mixing a couple of things together. So I'm pretty sure that the etymology of ogre is from Latin. So this is ogre Latin, right? The Latin orcus, right? So that's orcus. That's a god of the underworld in Roman mythology that then actually takes on a sort of like his own life as a very, very interesting folk creature. And this might be where that story then comes in. Because in the 10th century, what you see in like Spain and France and Italy is what looks like essentially the revival of some sort of like folk version of the Dionysian rites, and their the figure is Orcus, who in this also like is revived in the German area. So there he's known as Horko. The interesting thing about this is that in England, where the revival also shows up, his name is Wodewasan. So that's very close to Woden.
Interesting. Okay,
yeah.
so
there's something that.
Are you telling me my high school history teacher lied to me? Terrible.
No. I think
if he's still alive, I'll have words with him. Okay.
I think what happens in this time period is that Orcus is sort of like applied to multiple like folk tales. So this might be one of those folk tales that then where the figure then shows up, like, so as sort of like a sort of maybe like the epitome of the troll, right? The underworld being that's messing with our existence in different ways. Because of course the church is not happy about those folk revivals, those carnivals, because fun things happen.
Well, they don't control it for a start, so
they don't control it, right?
yeah.
So what about an orc?
Well,
Because I feel like, again, an orc is something that I would consider in the same realm as in my opinion anyway, like before we did this podcast, as like that typical troll type creature.
Well, I think you're taking that from obviously Tolkien, who was a very sort of highly educated linguist. So he was picking multiple words from Old English and Scandinavian and various sort of languages to pepper his stuff with. He was steeped in Germanic law and history, and he was sort of combining all kinds of words from all over Europe, and that to sort of to give it a richness. And very few people have had that linguistic background and also the ability to write a story as well. So I think orc was one word, and I mean words of like goblin.
Goblin was another one that
I think it has a link to medieval French as well, or something like that. There's multiple words there.
Goblins are always bald in my mind, though. They're like these little wrinkly, bald creatures.
I think you're thinking of all the
like from Harry Potter, huh?
little scrotums running around. That's what I think of a goblin for some reason.
The thing is, most of my images of these creatures comes from the sort of 1980s sort of fighting fantasy books that had some spectacularly gory illustrations that are highly worth looking at. Interesting, I was tracking down some of those illustrations. One notorious one of this is this rotting corpse with the sort of flesh peeling off it, for kids as it's crawling towards the viewer. And a great illustration. I thought, I wonder who the artist is. The artist is Russ Nicholson. And you know what he's done? He's done a choose your own adventure book not that long ago based on Beowulf.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Yeah. I haven't read it, so I can't say whether it's any good, but he did all the illustrations for it. So it's like a choose your own adventure. They're like semi-educational, but they're but they got him because he's like known as like an old school kind of.
So question for you in that regard. Since you mentioned Beowulf, is Grendel a troll?
Well, there are many academic papers have discussed this, and I'm sure you're well aware. The most interesting take on Grendel's mother as well is sort of this evil feminine thing, much debated, and again, but was that does Grendel represent another belief system? Possibly some kind of Celtic mother goddess type thing that they don't like, that the people who are telling the story from their perspective, this is evil, whatever that is, we have to get rid of that. And certainly there's in another
weird if that's the case, like that.
There's no proof. This is just a hypothesis.
Yeah, I know. Just thinking about like, and it's taking place over there on the other side.
Well, I mean, the Celtic people's covered an awful lot of sort of area. Depends how you define Celtic, because it's a very
Right, so we mean deep history. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's one sort of take that might have been their myths at the time, as opposed to they're reaching back to their mythology, which is completely lost to us. What they would consider ancient. That's one take on it. That Grendel, and certainly the descriptions of Grendel and Grendel's mother as being monstrous and certainly definitely not human in any respect. But I think there's another reference in I don't know which saga it is where somebody sailing on near a shore and sees a giant woman or something in the forest, and that's implied to be one hypothesis is that a reference to what that really means, that's the symbolism of the people who worship the giant goddess who lived over there.
Is that what is his name? Thorstein.
I think so. Yeah.
So what he sees is actually quite fascinating, because it is, or maybe it's Bosa Saga. It could be Bosa Saga, where Borsi he's traveling north, and then he sees on shore, he sees like, this is like northern Norway somewhere. He sees a giant female troll fighting a male troll, I think it is. And then it goes, and her genitals were hanging below her skirt, and Bosi thought that was quite conspicuous.
Oh, the sagas are going to go there wherever you think, surely they'll not. Oh, yes, they are. Yes, of course. The older ones especially. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Which kind of brings me to want to talk about female trolls in particular. And you'll know about the Hulda or Huldra, and the female trolls, who are the sexy trolls, depending upon
I'm listening.
The sexy trolls, where if you're wandering through the forest and you see this very attractive woman who has a tail, and you propose to her, and you have things in common, and make her your wife for a year. And you keep things all cool, and you're compatible, shall we say? Then the tail drops off, and she becomes a normal human again. So she's no longer.
You have to go to church.
Oh yes,
so, you have to get married in the church. So that's when
this is that interesting weird crossover of like very old beliefs blending in with a sort of Christianity and folklore and other things like that.
A lot of those stories are attached to the shieldings up in the pastures in the mountains in Norway, right? So it's like this. Usually, it's like some guy goes and looks after the cattle up there all by himself.
He's lonely,
the entire season, and then he shows up with this chick with a tail, and then he brings it to the church, and then they get married, and the tail falls off, and it's like, what's been happening, guys? What is this? I'm not sure I want to know.
Well, I is it a symbolic thing? Is it that she, might it have been that she had a long pigtail or something like that from another tribe, and that might have been it. But over the years, that's got all distorted, and and just a long pigtail doesn't sound very sexy and weird. But she had an actual tail. By the time
you marry a cow,
well, who knows? The love that dare not speak its name up in those pastures, I think.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if she doesn't marry somebody, and then she becomes incredibly evil and lives a very, very long. Is it like 1,000? It says 1,000 years old, a very, very long time. So she has she becomes incredibly evil and this much more sinister figure if she doesn't find a man, which again, could you be more sexist? No, if she doesn't find a man, well, you know what happens then? Then she becomes super evil and lives forever. Wow. Okay. Somebody had issues. Back in the
So are these like the medieval version of like the modern sexy Halloween outfit type of people you find everywhere?
I wouldn't even say that. I think she's in the illustrations I've seen, or the folk illustrations I've seen, she's naked. So he meets this woman who's just happens to be naked in the forest. Oh, hi, I'm just.
So she can't hide the tail. The tail's on the show.
Yeah. So that's how we know she's not hiding it. Oh, of course, in other stories, he then falls in love with her, and then he finds out she has a tail, and so on and so on. But there's various sort of stories like that.
There are also variations of this story from southern Scandinavia, where you have this is usually a shepherd who hangs out at night with the sheep, and then this beautiful woman. This beautiful woman comes to him, and she's naked, and then they start, getting into it and everything. And then as he's like putting his arms around him, he realizes she's got a hole in the back, and she's actually like a tree. So he's like humping a tree instead.
But I mean, that's
what that is somebody who's fucking a tree and their mates come out of the forest and gone, what you up to? And he's gone, you're not going to believe this. You are not going to believe this, but I swear this was a beautiful woman.
Just as soon as you turned up, you'll never guess.
Yeah, she's a fucking tree.
Going back to the naked ladies with tails out in the forests, and the shieldings and so on, which is particularly a trait of like the mountainous areas of Scandinavia. Like when we get to the time of like the Burning Age, where we have a lot of witch hunts and so on, we have to keep in mind that comparably there's a lot more people in Sweden and Norway who are being charged and punished in different ways, also executed for having sex with animals. So there could be something there with the whole tail thing. Just saying.
Well, yeah, I mean that's
people suck, don't they?
I mean, it's the Christian concept. I think in old law, certainly in England and other parts of the world, that any kind of unnatural sex from the Christian point of view, whether that was gay sex, whether it was sex with animals, or even with your own wife, if you did something that was considered a bit dodgy or this came to light, that was all classed as evil or satanic. So fucking a tree was the same, was as bad as having sex with a pig. Really? It seems there's a bit of a gap there, but from the people at the time, that was all as bad and as evil. And the only reason somebody would do that is because they'd been somebody cast a spell on them, or they were up to evil stuff.
But see, this is what you get from having an atmosphere of sexual repression, right? Like if people could just do the things that they'd like to do, then they wouldn't have to go fuck a goddamn cow, right? Like that's really what that is about.
No, I don't think so. I think men are just fucking. Because you never hearing a woman. There's never a woman fucking a cow. Doesn't happen. Unless a guy's talked to her.
Well, a cow is a female.
Okay,
a bull.
Well, I mean,
bull. Or it still stands. It's never women. It's always men. Because men are just fucking. I don't know what goes on in our minds sometimes.
This is an entirely different kind of horror. Really.
I don't want to know what goes on in your mind sometimes.
You don't want to know what goes on in my mind. But it feels... It just always does come down to... But you can't... Are
you engaging in self-shaming right now, Dan? Is that what's happening?
You can't blame sexual repression because men would still fuck weird shit. No matter what you can say to men, you could do whatever you want to do. Go do whatever you want to do. And there'll be this one thing over there that you're not meant to do. And they'll be like, I'm going to go put my dick in that. Because it's just what some men do. And I don't understand why, but it's just what they fucking do. So
it's pretty trollish right there.
You're reminding me of a routine by Lenny Bruce from the 1950s, one of many routines that got him banned in the 1950s. And he said, trapped on a desert island, he says in the routine that men would do it to mud. So if you catch your husband with mud...
But I think that because there could be a guy and he could be like, you can do whatever you want with your wife. She will do anything you want. You two can have the most amazing sex life, whatever. But if he's so inclined, when he's working late and there's some sheep about, if he's that way, he's fucking the sheep. And you can't, it's not just because, I don't think it's just because his wife gives him.
I can put a nicer twist on this, that one of the reasons why people often claimed that they were having sex with animals is because theft was punishable by death. Whereas doing things with animals that you shouldn't, was often a fine or some kind of prosecution and perhaps all kinds of things like that. So often people were genuinely... So if it's a choice between being accused of that or being killed, you're going to always claim that. There might be something horrible. People are going to laugh at you for the rest of your life, but you're going to be alive. So that's why a lot of that comes from.
Okay, I just need to add a fun fact here. I don't know if it's fun, but a fact about my home country, Denmark. It was only in 2013 that we outlawed bestiality, so sex with animals.
Oh my goodness!
Wow.
Yes, and here's the interesting.
Is that about
thing.
the time that you moved to America as well? Is that around the same?
No, a couple of years later. We don't have any sheep around here. Anyway, and what do you know? Actually, in maybe it was actually in 2017. Anyway, it was very recent.
Wow.
The northern parts of Denmark were actually a sort of like sex tourist spot for primarily Norwegians. Just FYI, yeah, for renting
oh my goodness,
a bed in our stables.
What the fuck is? I see. This is when you said
like people were
about,
coming from Norway and Sweden to fuck animals.
we've gone full circle because you said earlier about Scandinavia being like the weird place up there, and this might be why. Because
yeah, there you go.
Apparently, you could just.
I was going to ask. We talked about people being prosecuted for these things by doing the kind of like the witchcraft craze, but there is a troll connection there as well, because there's a character, and I cannot remember the name of it, but a character who's essentially a sort of a placeholder for the devil or Lucifer. But he's not called that. He's a kind of troll as well. Okay. I try to remember the name of the character, but in folklore, where all of these trolls that this guy will get you, it's a Christian folklore type sort of thing. This new sort of character who's a kind of a composite of all the evil things of trolls. Oh, he'll eat you. Oh, he'll suck your blood. Oh, he'll do this kind of stuff. Who's this? Sort of depicted with like a top hat or like some kind of strange hat. This kind of sinister guy will come and get you, who's a sort of version of Satan, sort of version of Lucifer, but also kind of a troll as well in much, much later folklore. This sort of strange character who'll kind of just seeing all that kind of what do we call it, sort of convergent mythology stuff just end up just getting poured at the same bucket, even though it's coming from completely different random places. And I always find that interesting that this sort of people, instead of it just being a line in the sand, we're not going to have that. It just ends up getting. Yeah, somebody's mentioning. I think it is Gamla Eric or Old Eric. I think that is Old Eric is the character, a bit like Old Nick, in England, and you hear that. But this Old Eric character is this really interesting sort of composite figure in mythology. But at this point, this is when the trolls are doing something different again. And depending upon which belief you go follow.
Do they ever do anything good?
Well, I'm going to get to that. Yeah, maybe.
Because
there's obviously
you're on.
There's all the stories of the trolls being evil and being tricked and kind of doing sort of with all the sort of supernatural evil stuff from cannibals and wanting to eat people and all that kind of stuff. But gradually, now this is a piece of folklore, or one version of this, is that the trolls get fed up of being hunted and terrible stuff happening to them, so they decide to take their career in a different direction. They get smaller and smaller. And just, rather than running away from people, they decide to live in their houses.
Oh.
So this is one theory, one interpretation, one hypothesis. And so people have problems with their cattle or things going on in their houses. But then maybe if I leave something out for the troll, my cattle will be okay. In fact, if I leave a bit more, maybe he'll keep an eye on them. So this idea of leaving little gifts out. So this idea of the household spirit, kind of Nisa, Tomten, and various other words. There's things that seem to be perhaps distantly descended from the idea of trolls. Could it be slaves? No, I wouldn't say slaves. You never see them.
Slave-like, kind of like.
No, it's not really a slave. It's like they want to live in your house.
They become Dobby.
Yeah, well, no. I hope not. But no, they're living in your house. So, but if you leave something out, maybe they'll look after it. You leave a little something out for them, and you won't see them. But that kind of, we get the modern day, completely watered down, Baudelaire's version of the elf on the shelf. But before all that, you get this idea of this creatures living in your house, and of course, in some theories and things, these are also somehow related to your ancestors. which seems, or your ancestors trolls, I don't know, but depends upon which local folklore blend you've got. And sometimes these things are the ghosts of your ancestors, and some of them, no, they're not. They're little creatures who, and that's where you get that modern day thing of all the little trolls with like the pointy hats and the big beards and that sort of thing. This kind of, this sort of completely watered down version of these creatures that used to be marauding terrible things and eat your cattle and steal it and do all terrible things. But now they've reduced in size. They hang out in the rafters and little places, so you can't get rid of them. So you might as well appease them. They've
been domesticated, and
they've been domesticated. Yeah,
they look back on the former trolls and wish they could go back to that life where you got to eat the.
Well, I think in the story that I read was that it's the fact that they got fed up of being hunted, fed up of living out in the cold. Well, maybe we should change our approach. We could live with people and find a way to coexist. So that's a sort of.
That kind of sounds like dogs, the domestication of dogs.
Well, possibly.
I don't know why that's so funny.
Or are the dogs domesticating us?
Well, that's true.
Well, that's true. Possibly now.
Well, I think cats domesticated us. If you look at the way that cats are, they've
got the real hustle.
Definitely domesticated us. Yeah.
Well, I always like that line in the Terry Pratchett, the Pyramids book, where they have all these cats and they have these gigantic pyramids and things like that. And he says they have thousands of miles of sand, but there's still piss in the pyramids. Why? You've got all this sand perfect for you, but no, it's still in the temples. But
That's what things do.
That's cats for you. Yeah, absolutely.
You can have all the sexual freedom with your wife, but you still go fuck a sheep.
Apparently.
I don't. Some people do, may I add.
Dan, I don't know what you get up to, but that's totally your business, man.
No, I don't. I'm very particular about that kind of thing. But
about your sheep.
It has to be a good-looking sheep. I'm very picky.
Well, then I think the most modern day sort of interpretation of trolls is the movie Border, which you probably heard of.
No.
Border is a very unusual sort of quirky, I guess almost indie film, where this guy is working as a sort of border guard type kind of guy who just checks people's bags and stuff, but clearly isn't human or is some kind of Neanderthal kind of guy. And he meets, surely enough, he finally meets his Neanderthal lady, and they have this very sort of strange relationship. But it's, are they trolls? Are they Neanderthals? And there's one theory that says that is the sort of the concept of the troll, these primitive people living out there, is this kind of some kind of ancient folk memory of, when humans and Neanderthals were sort of coexisting, which is impossible to prove, but I like that. I like that idea of it being this kind of, maybe that's where all the concept of the strange people who aren't living in houses, who still live out in the wilds doing their own thing. But yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, like we humans have existed with a bunch of other versions of humans for a very long time. And some of them have been smaller and some of them have been bigger. It's not impossible to just like theorize. And I know that, all of my academic peers would like crucify me right now. It's not impossible to theorize that there is some lingering memory of some of those sort of populations that have existed out there. Most of whom, by the way, have gone into our general genetic makeup, right? Which means
the troll is inside us.
The troll is inside us, and this whole thing of like encountering a naked lady with a tail out there in the woods is probably not totally impossible for some of our ancestors.
Yeah. The most interesting, this is an academic paper, so we're fine, so your colleagues can have a go when they like. There was a question, I think it was something like along the lines of, did the Neanderthals and primitive humans kiss? Surely there's no way you can possibly answer that.
No.
But you can, apparently, in some skulls they found, in the bacteria in the mouths of the or the teeth or whatever they could salvage, and the kind of bacteria that could only be transmitted
through kissing,
to all mouth-to-mouth contact of some way.
Mm-hmm.
So, so perhaps we're more romantic than we give them credit for. Maybe the trolls are getting a bad rap.
Yeah, and I am getting visions of like Hamlet talking to a skull.
Well, we are back to Denmark.
I guess so.
Or Hamlet. Yeah, so that's
okay. Is there
that is a great
else
place to encounter Neanderthals, though.
Yeah,
Denmark.
Well, the only thing I was going to mention, yes, the troll cross.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
which is a load of rubbish, but it's great. Okay. But it is an interesting thing that somebody said there was this troll cross symbol he found on his farm that was to keep trolls away, and it was an ancient symbol. Mm-hmm. Great. If that was true and provable, that'd be fantastic. Except there is no proof anywhere at all apart from this one guy on this one farm who says. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty tenuous evidence. Mm-hmm. I'd like it to be true, and if they find further evidence that it is, great. But it's essentially probably some kind of sigil symbol saying this is Hrolf's farm or something like that. Something like probably.
So does that symbol exist anywhere outside of that farm?
Nope.
Okay, and for anybody listening, the symbol, it's kind of like the Othala room, but with curled feet. The feet like curl back around.
Oh, it looks pretty cool. Yeah, I've got a pendant with it on somewhere. So there's nothing wrong with having cool symbols, but it unfortunately it's not. There's as yet. You never know. Archaeology. Somebody might find something in a field tomorrow that will prove that it's goes back to the 9th century. And fantastic. I'm not saying it won't, but so far nothing's been found. And but the very last thing, of course, I mentioned is this of which you're going to be talking about next time, I believe, is trolldom, which is a much, much later thing, but has the same name, which is all kinds of stuff, which I'm not going to mention. I'm going to mention very briefly. It's all to do with talking to the dead and all kinds of shenanigans like that. But I guess tune in next time is all I can say.
That's it. Yeah. So we're doing back-to-back spooky episodes because we now have a Bob to plan for us. So we actually have some scheduling. So back-to-back horror episodes, I guess.
Oh, yes.
Which is always fun. Always a lot of fun. Okay, so I think after an hour and a half, I've slowly realized that maybe I'm a troll. And other than that...
you also have romantic
that dies with this episode.
I don't know. I feel like this is a new coconut bikini kind of scenario.
So I did say we need to do the
dick biter for that matter.
I did say we have to do the coconut bikini in the next 2 episodes, so I'm going to do my best. For the next episode, just because it and Halloween seems like it's going to be quite fit in. So I'm going to do my best to get one made for the next episode. Mateus, maybe you can try and get one. If not, I'll do it on my own. I don't mind.
I'll see what I can do.
Yeah,
and then I'll lower the camera a little bit so you can actually see my
get a little bit of cleavage.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm there.
All right.
All right, hey, Rich. Thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, Daniel Dias. Always a pleasure.
Yes, always a pleasure.
We look forward to werewolves next year.
And if you're very lucky, you might talk about whales as well.
Oh, I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
Zombie whales.
No, it's a guy who turns into a whale.
Oh, that guy. I know that.
Yeah, you know who I mean. Yeah.
Yes. I'm looking forward to that.
It was a one-time thing, Dan. It's fine.
Yeah.
No, I had a terrible joke I'm not going to make. So, okay. Rich,
I want to hear it.
Rich, where can people find
you find it all over the internet. But if you look up of Wolf and Man or of Wolf and Man book, I'm on Twitter. I have a blog and a Facebook page that I'm sort of going to be taking in some weird and wonderful esoteric directions shortly. So that'll be fun stuff. I'm trying to actually, for once, get away from history, go into the more weird and wonderful side of things. Hopefully, talk about that. I've posted enough about history, so I'm going to go into the weird side of stuff. So I think October is the perfect time for that.
Can't wait to see that. Mateus, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on my website. Just type in my name, Mathias Norvig, and there you go.
There you go. Obviously, you can find me, Daniel_Farrand1 on Instagram, or still need to. Oh, here's a fucking. This is what I forgot. Oh, I don't have my phone with me. I had a message of some guy on on Facebook the other day. Like, I just saw this message in my requests from Daniel Farrand. I was like, this is weird. I wonder what this is. Clicked on it. It's some guy with like a weird fucking picture. Really weird picture. And then he had like a bunch of other pictures of him, like in this weird kind of like ghoulish makeup. Maybe he's a really nice fella. Maybe he listens to the podcast. I don't know. It looked really odd. And he was like, oh, so strange to find the only other Daniel Farrand on Facebook. How are you doing? Name twin or something. And that was the only message. So, and that's all he said. First of all, why the fuck? Can you imagine looking up the other Matthias Nordic on Facebook and then messaging them saying, how are you doing, name twin? I was like, don't do that, first of all. It's weird. And second, I looked, there's fucking tons of Daniel Farrands on Facebook. You're fucking lying to me. I'm not the only one. So why the fuck are you sending me a message? If you do listen to the podcast, I'm sorry, but it was a little bit weird.
I mean, I follow my name twin on YouTube. He's some kind of low-level guitarist, has a little channel with about 50 views per song. But occasionally I find it, I get shocked. I'm like, oh, Richard Blackett has uploaded a new video. Have I? Oh, no, it's that other guy. Yes, of course.
So yeah, that happened to me this week, I guess, it was a little bit strange. I did find it odd. Yeah, someone in the chat said he's clearly a troll.
It could be.
Yeah.
An actual literal troll, yes.
He looked more like a ghoul than a troll. But all right. If you enjoy this show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you can, please think about supporting us on Patreon. Obviously, you get to watch the episodes live, which is always good fun. The chat is always a lot of fun. There's a lot of little in-jokes that are on there that miss. Sometimes the chat's funnier than the episode. I'm reading, chuckling along to that. So, that's always good. It's a wonderful little community. You also help us keep growing the podcast. We're going to start with the Storytime episodes again. You also get every episode, I think it's like 4 weeks before they come out for general release now. So yeah, if you're listening to this and you can't wait for the next ones, they're already released on Patreon, so you can jump on there, listen to them, get caught up, or get in front of everybody else. And obviously follow us on Instagram, Facebook, just at Nordic Mythology Podcast.
And YouTube.
And YouTube, YouTube.
Yes.
Hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell button. We're releasing a bunch of interviews on there.
Yeah. Then you can always see me picking my nose while we are doing the episodes and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, I try. Sometimes I catch myself like just getting my finger up there, and I'm like, fuck, no, I'm on camera, and people actually might watch this now. So when we first started, it didn't matter. I'm fucking got my finger up there all the time, and it's like no one's gonna watch it. So
scratching your balls, picking your nose.
Yeah. I know you told me at Midgard, but you rarely even wear pants when we do this. So.
God damn it, you outed me.
It seems that you were trolls all along.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, let's get on. Yeah. All right. Thank you all very much for listening. Thank you for everybody who joined the chat and watched live. And Rich, most importantly, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Right. Take care. Have a good evening.
Ciao.